do we totally jump into what our students are interested in, or do we try and expand their minds?
I would say both, because there's some tunes that some of my kids I do with. I do a lot of classic rock because obviously they're classic, so you got to do some. And they're like, these songs are so old. Why are we doing this?
Are you doing the Beatles, Steve?
No,
are you doing the Beatles?
You know what? We haven't done a lot of Beatles lately. But the funny thing is, classic rock now is what was written in the 90s. Like, I turned on the radio or a radio station the other day, and the station was called Classic Alternative. And Alternative was written in the 90s.
Oh my gosh. Did it have Dave Matthews Band?
Yes. It had all these 90s bands, and they are now classics. So when I bring some 90s tunes, these songs are so old. I'm like, but they're good.
You are listening to the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we teach music educators how to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. Let's do it. Welcome to episode 17 of the Music Ed Mentor podcast. I am your host, Elisa Jansen, formerly Jones. You can follow my music education blog at professionalmusiceducator.com or find me on Facebook at Professional Music Educator with Elisa Jansen. This week, we are featuring my interview with Steve Giddings, who recently wrote the book on how to start a rock band at your school. If you've been reading any of your NAFME magazines or teaching music, then you know that a lot of schools are heading down the road of professional bands, not just as a way to teach the students in smaller programs, but as a way to leverage the ensembles to make some money. More and more, we are seeing the world, the music education world to be specific, become more and more commercialized. So how can we capitalize on this trend as music teachers? What's in it to having a rock band for ourselves? What does this mean for us, whether we are in a small school or a big, robust program? What can Steve teach us about rock band education that we didn't already learn in college? I suspect it's a lot. To answer these questions, I got Steve on live today for you. But first, you have to realize that even if you want your students to sing any song they bring to you off the radio, they have to be able to read the basic notes, rhythms, and chords. That's why you need to have smart music accessible to every student in your program. Smart Music Online gives your students access to scales, arpeggios, warm-ups, and drills that will train them in the skills they need to be able to be successful no matter what genre and instrumentation they're faced with. It's by focusing on these basic skills that your ensembles improve overall, and why you need to navigate over to smartmusic.com right now and get your teacher's account set up today. Try it out for yourself in your own practice time, which we all know that you're still doing, right? And discover how Smart Music can not only support your students' learning, but streamline your teaching as well. Now, without further ado, my interview with Steve.
I'm Steve Giddings. I live in Prince Edward Island on the east coast of Canada. I run a website called stevemusicroom.com. And I recently wrote a book called Rock Coach, a practical guide for teaching rock bands in schools. I've been teaching in Prince Edward Island for 10 years. I guess this would be my 10th year in Prince Edward Island. I was at a really small school of 50 kids my first year, and then after that I was in a K-6 school until today, and there's 450 kids in that school. So it's quite a jump from 50 to 450.
Yeah, seriously.
We actually have another music teacher at the school as well, so because it is so large, there's another music teacher that's part-time there as well.
Wait, there's 450 kids in the whole school, and that's large?
Yeah, because
Nice.
every kid gets music.
Well, hooray for Canada. I wish we could do that here.
Yeah.
I'm at a private Catholic school, and our enrollment is, I got to count up how many students I have and then add the middle school. It's probably about the same, around 500.
Yeah.
And we are a small school in the area.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, by comparison, the 8-9 school where my daughter goes is like 700 kids, and it's 2
Yeah.
grades.
Yeah, well, there's definitely some schools like that. Like, we just did some restructuring of the school system, but last year there was a middle school in Charlottetown, which is the capital city here, that had almost 1,000 students. Kind of insane, really.
Yeah, when I taught middle school at a public school, and I taught band and orchestra, and I was super proud when I had a third of the school in my program. So it was like I had 300 students, and there were 900 kids there, and it was 3 grades. It was crazy.
Wow.
They just pack them in. It's like a freaking sardine factory.
Yeah, really.
Cool. Well, tell us about your book. Why did you write it?
Well, I decided, I guess there's a lot of reasons why I wrote it. One was I'd been doing a lot of writing last 10 years or so, and I just thought, wouldn't it be cool if I wrote a book? I hummed and hawed about it for a while, and, just one of those things you say, like, I'm going to write a book sometime, and then you just never do it. And then I started thinking, I have a lot of ideas that other music teachers would probably like to hear about. I mean, I don't know everything, but I've had people ask me, can we sit down for coffee? I want to chat about rock bands. I want to know how you do it. And so I enjoy writing, so I decided there's no better time than the present, so I'm just going to do it, because otherwise I'll just say I'm not going to do it, because I'll just do it next year, or I'll, wait till after my son is 6 or 7. I'll do it then. I guess there's just a number of reasons why I decided to write it, but mostly it's because I felt like I had to get my voice out there and help other teachers.
So you have a rock band program at your school then?
Yeah, this year we have 2 rock bands, and those are extracurricular, but I also do a lot of rock stuff within the regular music class as well.
So I know down here in the U.S., commercial bands are kind of a big thing. How is a rock band different from a commercial band? Like, could you commercialize your rock band class?
When you say commercial band, do you mean, I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, so a band that is intended to eventually make money, right? So whether they're doing like a live show, or they're doing background music for a commercial, or, whatever it happens to be, that there's this need in the market right now for people to play for commercial purposes.
Okay. Well, I'm sure it could totally turn into that. I mean, the first year I taught at the school I am now, there were kids. I mean, it's a K-6 school, so they're pretty young. But what happened after I kind of just let them go? They're going into grade 7 to the next school. Over the summer, they actually formed together again and made money on a ferry, which is pretty cool, because they did that all themselves, and their parents helped them out and organized all that. So, I mean, there's potential for that for sure.
Yeah, my daughter plays the tuba, and we had a big yard sale like a year and a half ago, and she was trying to make money for a Hawaii trip with her class. So she pulled out her tuba and actually made like $120 that day just in tips.
That's great.
I feel like the politicians and stuff really just don't get why we do music. Like, they don't care that it improves all of these other academic areas or whatever. They just want it to be something that is marketable. And so I love that rock band and commercial groups and stuff like that can truly be marketable. Do you feel like that making our ensembles marketable is really what your book ends up being about?
Oh, well, it's more so about just sustainability, really, and teaching kids how to be musicians in a modern world, because you know, when you're going to play music outside of school after you graduate grade 12 or whatever, you're likely not going to play in a wind band unless you're in the Army or there's a community band or whatever. But you will likely pick up a guitar and start playing with your friends. So, and at the same time, like what you said earlier, it's definitely more relatable for an audience and for a government person or a politician than some of the wind band stuff, even though like there's definitely some popular wind band stuff. And I mean, in Canada, we don't have as much of a wind band tradition as you guys do that down in the States. But it's definitely more relatable to an audience and to the students and to, just the general public.
So, do you really feel like kids aren't getting what they need in school? Tell us about the traditional ensembles and how having a rock band can help out those kids who maybe don't feel like they have a place.
Well, exactly. I mean, rock musicians and popular musicians generally, they make music differently than, say, a classically trained person. Because, for example, when you're playing in a wind band or an orchestra, you're reading music. And a lot of the time, if you take that music away from that orchestral musician, they can't play. But then you get the rock musician or the pop musician who doesn't need that music in front of them. They just make the music because it's part of them. They jam all the time, or they improvise, or they compose. And it's just a different type of person, a different type of learner, because you get those kids that are so musical and play a really mean guitar, outside of school, but they don't really have any place in the music program that's given to them because it's mostly classically based. But if you have, a mix of everything, like you have that wind band and you have that jazz band and you have that rock band, you include more kids into your program that wouldn't necessarily be included with what's already being offered.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, how does your book help us in that particular respect in reaching students who aren't getting what they need in a more classical setting?
Well, it's set up basically to teach classically trained teachers how it's different and how you have to teach it differently and how you have to kind of step away and just let the kids take over a little more, because I know like we're all classically trained. That's just where we come from. It's, and I'm classically trained as well, but I had to kind of unlearn a lot of stuff after my degree. I had to, step away from sheet music. I had to start improvising. I had to do all these things that in a real musical world is normal. I guess what the book tries to do is just suggest new ways in thinking about how kids learn and how music is learned, and then gives them those practical skills to apply in their classroom. There's lessons there, and there's actual examples from my classroom that'll help them really be successful with something like this.
So, for somebody like me, because I am like super classically trained, I can play like jazz band stuff, but I am not strong at improvisation at all whatsoever. But if I wanted to start a rock band because I feel like things are right in my school and there's time in my schedule and I feel like it would be really useful. So your book is really kind of for somebody like me then.
Exactly. It's for someone like you who doesn't feel comfortable doing it, but wants to, and maybe just isn't sure how to start, or, doesn't have the instrumental skills, or doesn't really know the ins and outs of how the music works. So, I mean, it comes from there's a little theory in there, but it's assuming you have a classical degree and you understand some of the theory.
So tell us what's in the book. Like, how does it walk us step by step through how to get the thing going in our own schools?
Well, it gives a little bit of background, like I said, about how they learn differently, like rock musicians learn differently from classical musicians. And then it goes into basically what you need. The very first thing is what you need to get this equipment-wise. Like you need, bare minimum, you need electric guitar, you need a drum set, you need a guitar amp, there's a few things. And then it goes into why you need them and what ideally you would have in a perfect world, which we all know we don't have. But if there was a perfect world, you would have all these things. And then after that, it goes into selecting students and Do you want to audition? Do you want to do it in class? If you audition, here's how you audition. After you audition, here's the song you learn. Here's a step-by-step process on how you would teach the specific song. It goes into teaching You Really Got Me by the Kinks, and it gives you step-by-step instructions on basically how to teach it and why. And then after that, places to go from there. And then after that, it goes into lessons and ways you can implement it into your classroom on a regular basis. And really just starts at square one, assuming you know nothing, and then goes all the way through everything that you need to know until you perform in the concert. And in the middle there, it's all about like, here's how to play guitar, here's the chords that you need to know, here's a drum pattern that you should know, here's, just a little bit of everything.
So how does it compare to how kids traditionally learn music versus how rock musicians learn? Do you really feel like it's that different?
It depends. I find in K-6 music, where everyone takes music in its general, just we call it general music. Everyone kind of comes in, and we play. There's some reading, there's some improvising, there's some composing, there's a lot of mix of stuff. So I find K-6 lends itself well to this kind of stuff, because we're supposed to be doing that kind of stuff already. But when you get into grade 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, it seems to be really focused on reading and literacy, which has its place, of course, but it's not as important as a lot of us are led to believe. Like you should be able to read, yes, but what I think is equally or more important is being able to improvise and play in the moment and listen and, all those things that we seem to have lost in classical music.
Yeah, you make a really good point. My dad is like a band teacher for the last 40 years, band and choir. And he used to always say that like the truest test of a musician is how well they sight read. So you wouldn't really agree with that then?
No, I would not. How well sight reading is an ability for a classical musician. Like you need to be able to sight read for classical. But when you get into that, because then you put them in any musical situation and you take that music away, they're not musicians anymore. Like you take that sheet music away, what are they going to do? Because all they do is sight read and all they do is read music. Right? They're not going to be able to improvise or compose on the spot like a rock musician can. And a rock musician typically can play multiple instruments. Right? So I don't know if that's the truest test. I mean, being able to do all of those things well, like improvise, read, compose, jam with other musicians, play multiple instruments, I think is more of a truer test.
That's a really good point. So this is totally off script for what we were going to cover, but I'm just kind of wondering because like I look at the Roots. Do you know who the Roots are?
No.
So they're the band that plays along with Jimmy Fallon that's on like the late night talk show.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yep.
Right. Okay. And they are super well known for how quickly they can just pop in and out of different genres of rock music. So is that do you cover that at all in your book? Like, here's how you do reggae, or here's how you do like a funk, or here's a classical jazz riff. Do you get into that? Or is it where do you start and where do you end?
It doesn't get into specific styles because I feel like that's more advanced. It's more like just getting people going on it and being confident with teaching this style that they're not comfortable with, like rock music. But that would be the next book, because there's always these little nuances, right, in every style of rock. Break it down, and it's this big umbrella of rock, but then there's all these different little nuances that you do to make it a specific, different type of rock music.
Awesome. So you really feel like having a rock band is really important. But what sticks me is like I have a concert band, right? And like I could have 120 kids in concert band, and that's not a big deal. In fact, like the more the merrier kind of thing. Can you get that same kind of vibe with a rock ensemble where the more the merrier? Or is it kind of just for the elite kids? What do you think?
Well, see, the thing is, you could have at my school, we have the auditioned groups, which is the after school groups that are, the most I'll have in that group is 12 kids. Rock bands typically work better with smaller numbers, which really lends itself well to a program that might be struggling to retain kids or might just be starting out, right? But at the same time, I also do some rock band stuff with a whole class of, say, 30 kids, where, we'll learn a song by ear, this goes into, in the book, actually, I talk about this lesson that I go through here, but basically we learn a song by ear as a group, like rock musicians would do. And then we rearrange the song once we have the basics of it figured out. So we'll have drums, bass, guitar, keyboard, but we'll also have some people on Orff percussion. We'll have some people on boom whackers. We'll have some kids on, whatever they choose, whatever's in the room. And then we just kind of do our own rock arrangement / classroom instrument arrangement of this rock tune. So it gets a lot more kids involved.
Do you bring in singers at all? Vocalists?
Yeah.
That kind of thing?
Yes, of course. Yeah, singers for sure. That's the last thing we add when we do it as a class, so that we can learn the instrument parts first.
So who do you think this kind of instruction is invaluable for? Who's this really targeted to?
Well, I guess there's a couple different people it'd be targeted to, but it'd be mostly those people who really want to do this, but just don't know where to start and want to improvise and want to create, but never did it in university because it's, as if you do a classical degree, it's kind of frowned upon for some reason. Any one of those people who just want to try something new, want to have their kids improvising and listening and being actual creative musicians, because it's assumed that if you're a musician that you're creative. But being classically trained, I never actually felt like I was a creative musician until I started improvising on my trombone and playing drums. Like I picked up drums on my own for the most part, but I never read music on drums. I just play and improvise. But on trombone, I never felt like a creative musician until after my classical degree was done. And when I started playing with a ska group.
Ska.
Yeah. Ska rock, really. It's alternative. Ska alternative, we call it.
Ska alternative. No, I totally love that. And I totally get it because, like I said before, I am like the quintessential super classically trained musician. But you're so right. This so would have been valuable. And I always laugh when people are like, oh, you're a musician, you're super creative. And I'm like, no, I'm really not. Like, you hand me an 8-piece bar of music, sure, I could turn that into like a symphony for band, but I need that 8-bar of music to begin with,
Yeah.
And then it's just an organized mind is what I have, right? I'm the left-brained. So I've always kind of balked at being considered creative, but maybe that's because I play French horn. And
well, there's that, I won't hold it against it, of course. Yeah, and I find it's so compartmentalized now in the classical world. Like you'll have the players, and then you'll have the composers who are like, completely different people apparently.
yeah, weirdos. That's what we call them, weirdos.
Yeah, and then you have the improvisers who are the jazz guys, but they never have the same skills. They're always either performers, composers, or improvisers. They're never all three. In rock music and pop music, they are all those three things, and it just happens naturally. They're not compartmentalized. They're always composing and improvising and performing and all this stuff that Mozart used to do back in his day.
Oh, you think that, but Mozart was totally a copycat.
Yeah, but that's what rock musicians do. They just copy,
Right.
right? They
So
copy and come up with something new.
so we've been calling it rock musician, but really it could be anything from like a small jazz trio or combo to one of my favorite genres, which is like bluegrass, right? Because here in Colorado, we have all these big bluegrass festivals. It's like Blues and
Yeah.
Wine Festival, and
Yep, bluegrass is its own thing, right?
yeah, well, it's still improvisation. Like you switch out the instrumentation, and it's still kind of the same idea. So, like one of
Yeah,
my
I
favorite
mean,
bluegrass groups is Nickel Creek, and on their like debut album, which now is like 20 years old, I'm totally showing my age. But their like last song on the album is called "The Fox," which is like a traditional kind of folk tune, right? And
yep,
then 15 years later, once they're this huge established group, they re-record The Fox, but they throw in like all this awesome improvisation, and they pass it around through the ensemble. They start throwing in things from like Britney Spears and Bach,
yes,
and like
yes.
borrowing those things and stuff. So do you touch on that in the book too? Like how you can use what is already in existence, but then build upon it and make it your own?
Well, that's it. Like, there's lots of opportunities in rock music that come up where let's say a tune where there's one of those outros that are only doable in the studio context, right? Like it's just a fade out or something weird. So we a lot of the time we can't perform those, right? Because you can't do a fade out live. Just it's not possible. So what we do is we kind of come up with an ending that works. Sometimes we change around the chord structure, or um, maybe we'll just come up with a place where let's do this 4 times and we'll end it here, something simple like that. So really, those opportunities just kind of come up all the time with rock music.
Well, when you say it like that, it makes me think about actually when I do music for mass, which is probably the complete opposite of rock band stuff. But depending on how well the kids know the music and the pianists that I have and stuff like that, like we'll take out whole sections of a piece and kind of create our own arrangement just based
Mhm.
on the needs of the singers that we happen to have that day. So does that count? Like, do I get brownie
Well,
points?
and I'm not saying that in classical music it never happens. Like, of course, there are, places for that, but in rock music and pop music, it just happens without really thinking about it. Like rearranging and doing things like that. Like when I play in my rock group, if we're doing a cover of another band, we'll make it our own automatically. We don't really have to think about it. We just do it. Um, and it's more of a natural thing. It's not forced. It's not really thought about. It just happens. And that's the great thing about, not having the notation, because you can just do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but is that a skill that I can learn?
Of
Like
course.
when do I get to that point where I can just totally jam out on my French horn with my ska
Well,
band group?
you just do it. The first step is doing it. When I started playing trombone with this group, I never improvised in my life on trombone because I was never given the opportunity. But now I'm not amazing at it, but I can hold my own, when I'm playing. But you just got to do it. If you don't do it, you won't get better. It's like any skill. If you don't practice your math, you're not going to get good at your math.
Is starting with covers like a good way to go then?
Yeah, and I mean, starting with covers is definitely a good way to go, because then you kind of figure out the structure of how the music works. Because for the most part, every rock tune is verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, chorus. So once you figure that out, you can, if there's a guitar solo in the bridge, which there usually is, you don't have to play the solo that's on the recording. You could just play whatever you want there, and that's your open spot. But when you get to songwriting, you know the structure and how it works already. So starting with covers is a beautiful place to go.
Yeah, love me some quatrain form. Love me some quatrain form.
Yes.
All
Exactly.
right. So we've covered why this is important, especially for smaller school settings or, ensembles that struggle with retention. I think that's just
Mhm.
a great opportunity. So what do you really hope that teachers get out of this book?
Well, I just hope that it makes them more comfortable teaching this kind of stuff because, as you know, we don't learn it in our school. We don't learn it in our teacher training program. So, I'm just hoping teachers are able to find something useful out of it to help their teaching for the better and help the kids. So that those kids that aren't getting what they need in their music program can get what they need and be able to flourish and be the musician they want to be, and you know, not have to worry about, um, not have to worry about doing their music that they enjoy outside of school.
Yeah, I love that. And really, if we can get kids to enjoy what it is that they're doing in our classes, they're going to learn so much faster. Like I've
Yeah,
heard that statistic, like people learn 10 times faster when they're in a good mood. And if you
yep,
can throw some like really fun music at them, it makes a huge difference.
yeah, and it's not even just that it's more fun. It's just music that they can relate to better. It's not like we pick. Because I mean, there'll be kids that come in, they choose the music a lot of the time in the rock groups, which you wouldn't get that in a wind band per se because they don't listen to it all the time. They don't know what's out there. But in a rock band, they listen to it all the time. It's all constantly there. So they bring in stuff which already creates ownership. And when you have ownership of something, you have actual learning happening. You have kids that enjoy what they're doing.
So, do you advocate for kids like bringing in a piece and saying, dude, I totally love like this Taylor Swift thing? And I'm thinking of Shake It Off, by the way, which is in pentatonic scale, just so you know.
Yeah.
So they say, hey, I just totally heard this piece and it sounds awesome. I wouldn't go out and like buy the sheet music for it then.
No.
How would I teach it to them as a teacher?
What I do is I just sit with the recording with my guitar and I learn it. That's it. And since I started doing that 10 years ago, my ear has gotten so much better. I mean, still it's not amazing like some of my musician friends, but um, it's way better. You can hear the patterns. There's always these patterns, of course, like in any kind of music, you'll have specific patterns that you hear over and over. But you know, you become accustomed to certain patterns, but you also become accustomed to certain voicings on the guitar. Um, but then, after a while, you start to visualize where things are going. So you basically what I would do is sit down, learn it by ear. If the ear isn't working for some reason, sometimes you just get this chord, you can't quite figure it out. I just go online and look at some of the whatever else people put up because there's always something online if you search whatever song name chords and then it comes up and then you'll kind of get an idea of what they were hearing and then it's passed on again that way. So it's there's some sheet music kind of involved, but then at the same time you have um, tabs, so guitar tablature, which people put online all the time in a very informal way, but you get the idea. You have to know the song first. But say if you're trying to learn that challenging solo and you just can't quite get it, you go online, search tabs for that song, and it'll have all of the tabs written out that people have figured out and put online for other people to learn.
So we've mainly talked about if we are instrumentalists, but what if we're a vocalist? Is this still something that we should attempt, do you think? Or do we need to learn an instrument first?
You can definitely do it. I mean, there's different vocal stylings as well for rock ensembles that are specific to those to that music. But it helps to know at least one of the instruments or the basics at least. Couple chords on the guitar because really most songs are 3 or 4 chords until you get into some more complex stuff. Um, and then one simple rock pattern on the drum kit, and you're good to go.
Nice.
Yeah.
So where can we get a copy of your book if we're super sold on it, which we all should be at this point?
Yes. You can find it on Amazon, .ca and .com. It's in print format and just recently released in Kindle format.
Awesome. So you did it backwards of how I did my book. I did Kindle first and then print. You did print and then Kindle?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah, I wanted print. I wanted it in print primarily anyway, because I just kind of like print. And when the teacher has a resource, they kind of want to open it up on their music stand and just leave it there, right?
Oh,
So
totally. Yeah.
I was kind of going with that, and then I thought later I'll just release it as Kindle as well, so give more options.
Yeah, I think when I quit teaching my full-time job, this was like 11 years ago now or so.
Yeah.
I quit to stay home with my kids, right? And I opened my own private lesson studio and stuff. And the gift I gave myself was a guitar. And I took some guitar lessons for like 2 years. It was one of the best things I could have done for myself because
Yeah.
I'm not a strong pianist, so it's not like I could just jam out on a piano. And now I get to, play guitar for all kinds of things, which has just been fabulous. So I advocate, if it's something that you really want to have a skill in, like you said, Steve, practice it. Get it under your fingers, under your chops, whatever it takes.
Yeah, and something that you mentioned earlier about, jazz improv, that's a little bit different too, because really you have to do it a certain way. Actually, can I just go back to what we were talking about earlier just for 1 second? Is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, because you mentioned something about like a jazz trio and then went into bluegrass. And I'm just wondering, I'm kind of thinking about that because jazz is, you can get a degree in jazz, you can get a master's degree in jazz, you can get a doctoral degree in jazz. So really, it's kind of seen as this thing like classical music. You go to be trained to be a jazz musician.
Right.
Whereas you don't have that for anything else. You have that for some, like Berkeley school has kind of training for rock musicians, but they don't put it into the, what's the word I'm trying to find here? Academicize? Is that a word?
Sure. Why not?
It is now. They don't academicize rock music like jazz and classical has been. So therefore, it's really just a traditional music and a folk music per se, really. Folk musics aren't in the university at this point to where jazz and classical has turned to.
So depending on where we live, our students might be interested in one type of music or another, correct? So
yeah, sure.
Like, do we totally jump into what our students are interested in, or do we try and expand their minds?
I would say both, because there's some tunes that some of my kids I do with. I do a lot of classic rock because obviously they're classic, so you got to do some. And they're like, these songs are so old. Why are we doing this?
Are you doing the Beatles, Steve? Are you doing the Beatles?
You know what? We haven't done a lot of Beatles lately. But the funny thing is, classic rock now is what was written in the 90s. Like I turned on the radio or a radio station the other day, and the station was called Classic Alternative. And Alternative was written in the 90s.
Oh my gosh. Did it have Dave Matthews Band?
Yes. It had all these 90s bands, and they are now classics. So when I bring some 90s tunes, like these songs are so old, I'm like, but they're good. But anyway, that was a side point. But what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that they do become accustomed to them, and a lot of the time end up really liking those ones.
Totally, yeah.
Yeah, but I do let them bring in some stuff, and some of it's classics too. Like this year, one of the kids, grade 5, started learning Purple Haze by Jimi Hendrix on his own. And
Wow.
yeah, and it got like every nuance, every little thing, like it was perfect. Like it was like Jimi Hendrix was right there. He just learned it on his own. No notation, nothing. He just went on YouTube, had a few little video lessons on how to do it, and listened to it. Anyway, so he had pretty much the whole thing learned. All we had to do was add the drums and bass, and then get the singers to listen to it a few times, and they all love it, and that's a classic. But sometimes they'll bring in some of the newer stuff as well. But I mean, you got to filter that out too, because sometimes it's not school appropriate all the time.
Seriously.
Yeah,
Just
but
see, this is why everyone should teach at a religious school like I do, because Christian rock, dude, it's the shiz,
Yeah.
man.
Oh yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, if you can find music those kids can relate to, that they never want to stop listening to, like, it makes the hugest difference in your classroom management and how fast they learn and everything. It's just amazing.
Oh yeah, for sure. Have you ever wondered how to engage your students in music in an exciting and relevant way? Do you want to incorporate more improvisation, songwriting, and creativity into your practice? This book will guide you through the tried and true best practices for starting a rock band at your school, from the first audition to the final concert, and give you the practical skills you will need to become a successful rock coach. How's that?
Yeah, well, that's pretty darn good. So check out stevesmusicroom.com. I love the resources that you have on there, not just your rock coach book, although I think it is fabulous, but your recorder resources are what I'm totally stealing right now.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Oh, that's because the way I do recorders is they don't all pass off the same song at the same time. I let them pass off at their own pace. So like once they're through the first 8 songs, then I'm scrounging for material for these more advanced students while I'm trying to help the less advanced students too. So lots and lots of really great stuff on your blog. And I'm super happy that we were able to get you on to talk about Rock Coach today. So thank you, Steve.
Hey, you're welcome.
I know that I gleaned a lot of wisdom nuggets with that interview with Steve, and I hope you did too. Don't forget to grab Steve's book, Rock Coach, a practical guide for teaching rock bands in schools, available on Amazon now. We've included a link in our show notes, which you can access via my website at professionalmusiceducator.com/podcast or smartmusic.com/blog. And don't forget to check out Steve's website. There's a ton of great information on there, stevesmusicroom.com. One more word before we depart for this episode. If you're like me, you've recently attended your state MEA conference, and that's awesome that you did. I was privileged to present at the Colorado State Conference this last weekend, and I know firsthand the value of live professional development opportunities. That's why some other of our fellow music educators and I have started the International Music Education Summit, and we want you to be a part of it. It's 100% online professional development opportunity with live webcasts presented over 3 days from expert music educators around the world. Registration opens March 1st and is about 1/3 of the cost that you would typically pay for attendance at a conference. And this conference you can attend while at home in your pajamas. To join the email list, go to musicedsummit.com and sign up for notifications now. Registration opens March 1st. Don't forget to share this podcast with your like-minded music educator friends, subscribe yourself, and give us a rating. It really does make a huge difference with a very little amount of effort. Until next time, keep teaching on.